Some have said that the direction of your focus is the direction of your life. For the Christian, our focus is crystal clear. We are to look to Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. In every area of life, we are to lay aside the hindrances of our Christian journey and look to Christ as our example and strength to live the life He has called us to live. So today, let's starve our distraction and feed our focus on the Lord Jesus Christ. Welcome to the Walk Talks podcast and today's Friday Focus episode.
All right, good morning and welcome back to the Walk Talks podcast and this special Friday Focus episode. I'm joined here with Brother Scott Bratt. And
hello.
We are super duper excited to be here with you guys. We are thrilled to have a special guest today that we are actually interviewing, Brother Rob Moore, and he is a board member here at Southland, which is really special to us. But it's also really special to have him on air today because he also is a Ringgold native from right here in Ringgold, Louisiana. And he works here in the city here. And then he also attends our church. So it's really awesome to have Brother Rob Moore on with us. So welcome, Brother Rob.
It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Great to have you. We're just going to have a conversation with him today and find out a little bit about him, about his family, and about what he does, and hopefully be able to take away some truth and some application for us even today, and maybe areas that we can change, areas that we can grow in our walk with the Lord, because that really is our goal here on the Walk Talks podcast. So Brother Rob, if you wouldn't mind taking a little bit of time just to tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about your upbringing, a little bit about your family, a little bit about your testimony as you came to know the Lord. And yeah, we'll get things going here.
Absolutely. Well, so I was born and raised in Ringgold. You know, this has been home for me since I was a little boy. And my parents are both from Ringgold. They both attended the high school here. And my grandparents are both from Ringgold. So, and my great-grandparents. And, well, you get the picture. It's a long time for us. And I attended school here locally at Ringgold High School. And as I got older and decided, you know, kind of where I wanted to go, and I say where I wanted to go because that leads into part of my testimony. And I wanted to go to college at local, and I wanted to go into business. Business was something I always really wanted to be a part of. And so I went to Louisiana Tech, just down the road, about an hour from Ringgold, and graduated in 96, went to college, graduated Tech in 2000. Met my wife, Jessica, there at Tech. She was from central Louisiana, a town called Alexandria, a city called Alexandria. And so I was going to go to law school. I applied to law school 99, 2000. Went to law school in 2000 at LSU in Baton Rouge. And graduated in 03. Moved back to North Louisiana. Lived in a neighboring city of Minden for a little while. I got a job as an assistant district attorney here, prosecuting cases. Did that for about 4.5 years. Had a private practice, divorce cases, custody cases, property law, succession work, estate work, preparation of wills, and was a prosecutor at the DA's office. That's kind of a short summary, but I want to go back a little bit to that high school that we talked about earlier.
Sure.
So I came from a family that had very strong morals, but did not attend church. Church was not a part of our life growing up. We went to the standard vacation Bible school week that a lot of kids go to. But we never went to church on Sunday as a child. We never went to church on Wednesday as a child. Again, really, really good parents, really good moral upbringing. But I was not brought up in the knowledge of the Lord. I was not brought up in an understanding of what salvation or love of the Lord or acceptance of the Lord meant. But as a high school kid, I was kind of a kid about town. You know, I was the class president. I played football, I played baseball. You know, the local high school's 22, 23 students. So I knew everybody. And of course, being from here, starting kindergarten, graduating high school, And I started attending at various times a couple of the different youth groups in town. And as I did that, and I went for different reasons. I went for pizza. I went for, because that's where my friends were going.
Yeah, it's a classic
Yeah,
youth group.
yeah, it is. And there's some kids there who were raised in church and they love the Lord and they've already accepted the Lord. Then there's kids who haven't. So we played basketball. We had pizza. There was a Bible study. Got to know a youth minister. Went to Glorieta. It was a Southern Baptist church. Went to Glorieta, New Mexico once. Went to a youth camp. I think Tall Timbers in South Louisiana. But as I attended and as I went, seeds were being planted. Knowledge was being imparted, but there was no salvation. There was no knowledge of the Lord in a personal sense. It was intellectual knowledge. It was getting to know the basics, if you will, that were being taught. And I attended church sporadically. I might be in a church service on Sunday morning. I might be on the lake skiing. Again, I was not a believer.
Sure.
And so at the same time, coincidentally and interestingly, my future wife, Jessica, was a camper attending Southland in Ringgold.
Wow.
She was at a youth group in central Louisiana, but she came to Southland, and I believe one time it was Southland and one time it was the predecessor to Southland on the camp property. But she was a camper here in the town of Ringgold, where I was 4 miles away on a tractor baling hay.
Wow.
On the same summer. I never knew her, didn't know her until I got to college years later. But the Lord knew, and there was already being implanted in us a knowledge of this place and a knowledge of Ringgold for her that she did not know other than camp.
Yeah.
So fast forward a little bit to my freshman year. So I arrived in college, and when you get to college, you're trying to find your place. You're trying to find your group, your role. Nobody wants to be. We're not made to be lone wolves. We're made for community.
Right.
And so I started having some community connections with various groups. One of which was the Baptist Student Union, what's now known as the Baptist Collegiate Ministry, BCM at Louisiana Tech. And I got to know two guys there, Scott Carlin, was the director of the BCM, and John Schaffner. Mr. Carlin's now, last I know, he was at Texas Tech in Lubbock. He'd been a BCM director, worked at a church there. He may have actually retired by this point. And then John Schaffner is a missionary pastor in Saskatchewan, Canada.
Oh, neat.
But at one point in the fall of 1996, early 1997. I started attending those BCM messages. I started hanging out with those guys, and I realized that I needed the Lord. I realized that I had never been saved. I realized that I needed to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so I don't know exactly when. It was either in the December, January time frame, but it was in the darker dead of winter, if you will. I remember that. Those guys led me to the Lord. Those guys led me. Those seeds that had been planted, they were watered.
That's
and
amazing.
they grew. And I accepted the Lord. I was baptized my freshman year at Louisiana Tech at Temple Baptist Church in Ruston. Later on, of course, met my wife at the BCM. Several of the people that we met there, fellow believers, brothers and sisters in Christ, they were in our wedding. We were in theirs. We fast forwarded to getting married, and here we are. That's the salvation testimony and the what brought me back to Ringgold.
That's so neat. And I can't help but think, like, as you're talking about that, how every single one of those youth activities that you were going to, like, was preparing your heart for what the Lord was wanting to do, later on in your life, in college. And maybe there's a youth pastor listening today that's growing a little weary in the ministry or something. And, I don't want to have to plan one more youth activity. I don't want to have to buy 20 more pizzas, right? But just know that it's worth it. And
absolutely. And stay on that path. Stay on that path. I mean, you you don't realize oftentimes what's going on in that kid's life,
100%.
and that they're learning and that they're developing and they're growing, and you're imparting knowledge to them. You're doing your part, your role in the Great Commission. And if you never see fruit from that, that's okay, because the Lord knows when that fruit will bear. And I had that same conversation with our youth pastor here at our church the other day. So you've got a couple of kids in class that are just staring at the floor, staring at the wall. I'm like, are you listening? Are you there? Many times I wasn't there. Many times I was staring at the wall. Many times I was staring at the floor. And yet now, as a 46-year-old man, I raise my children in the knowledge and admonition of the Lord. And I raise my children, and I seek to serve the Lord. And those seeds were planted when I was that teen looking at the floor, when I was that teen looking at the wall and waiting for the pizza.
Right.
Yeah. So be encouraged, youth workers. Yeah.
That's right.
That kid that just shows up every now and then, someday he's going to have a story, and you could be a part of that. So, yeah, that's incredible. Why did you study law? What brought you to that?
Well, there's two reasons. One, when I was younger, we've all had experiences where we felt injustice, that someone didn't hear us, that someone did not listen to us, that something happened that should not have happened. And I've had several of those experiences as a child where I felt injustice, and I wanted to do something about that. I have a joke with some of the guys here at camp that can do anything. They're mechanics, they're welders, they're Cody Bill. Is master of all trades.
Totally.
The Lord has given him skills in every area. I can't do any of that. I can't change oil. I can't do any of that. But when someone has a problem or there is an injustice, I know what to do about that. And I can do what I can do to fix that. That started when I was a child, and those things, those injustices, if you will. The second is, I knew I wanted to be in business. I wanted to have a business that had a high margin, and service businesses have a high margin. And so when you get out of college and you decide, okay, am I going to start a store or am I going to start a restaurant? I've got to put $200,000 of capital into that. I knew that if I got an education in the law, that I could practice as a lawyer, and then nobody could ever take that away from me. That I could earn a good living, and that I could do it cheaply. If I have a laptop, a printer, a piece of paper, and a pen, I can make a living. And I don't have to have a lot of equipment or a lot of once the investment in the education has been made and the loans are paid off for that law school, then you're a high margin business. Your hours. There's been many times in my life I've worked a whole lot harder for a whole lot less money. There are times when I worked for $5 an hour. There are times now where I get to charge $2.50 an hour. Because it's a high margin business. So for me, it was a marriage of the two, an ability to both make a good living, which every man should want to do for his family, to be able to provide for his family. That every young woman should want in a future husband.
Absolutely.
And that's not the most important thing, but it is important. And of course, the second thing was for me an ability to help people solve problems and what I perceived oftentimes as injustices.
Would you say that it has been difficult to practice law as a Christian?
Yes. Especially in the area of law that I'm in. I used to do a lot more general practice, but what I have really focused on in the last 5 to 7 years is criminal defense work. That's where really the Lord gave me the best skill set. I've tried 19, 20 jury trials. I've had not guilty verdicts where the clients, the DA thought they were guilty, the police thought they were guilty, but 12 jurors didn't. And so looking back on that skill set was developed in a lot of ways as I grew up, and the experience that I had growing up. And they were good good and bad experiences. I had a really good childhood. I really had great parents, great family, great network of people that loved on me. So I was raised in a good situation from that sense. But I learned that as I handle criminal law, there's three kinds of people that I deal with. There's people that are normally what the world would consider good people. They're good. They follow rules. They do what they're supposed to do. But they get wayward sometimes. They have too much to drink at a restaurant one night and they drive home, or they take a little bit of something from the employer and take it home for use at their house. They're not criminals. They're people that aren't criminals. They just committed a crime. The second group are innocent. They weren't involved. They were just in the car when the traffic stop happened or they got pulled over. The police officer's like, "Whose dope is it?" "We don't know." "Well, you're all going to jail." Well, that's just not right. We don't arrest people because they're just in the car. Like, presence near it is not possession of it. That's an injustice. They're innocent. And then there's the driver of the car who's got 4 prior felonies and knows there's a half kilo of marijuana in the back of the trunk. He's a criminal.
Yeah.
But a lot of times these people are raw in their speech. They're raw in their behavior. Sometimes they're violent. It doesn't bother me, but it bothers my spirit. So a lot of times as a Christian, you have a certain behavior that you're changed by the Lord. You're changed by Him, and you constantly strive to continue to grow to be more like Christ. But oftentimes I'm in environments where I'm in a jail with a good many of men who are rough men or rough women. They're both sides, and so oftentimes it's a fertile ground a lot of times for love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. It's a fertile ground for those things because those people want and need those things. But at the same time, many of them are dangerous, violent human beings, and so it gets difficult at times. But again, the Lord gave me a skill set to do that.
Right.
I can wear one hat and then wear the other. There's a lot of Christians that are lawyers that will not do criminal law for that reason. They won't do family law, but oftentimes family law, that is, you're doing divorces. You're doing things which aren't really biblical or Christian in a lot of ways, and there are, of course, there are always exceptions for that. But from a standpoint of a lawyer, you have to remember, you have a role. If you represent, you're not the one getting a divorce. Your client is. Your job is to protect them and represent them, and there are other spouses, lawyers represent them. Nobody wants a doctor who picks and chooses what they do, who they save, not save, but who they treat, who they. Nobody wants an accountant that decides whether you should or shouldn't do it. You hire a professional to perform a task. So as a Christian, I have to acknowledge that my client has hired a professional to perform a task, and I'm going to do that task to the best of the ability the Lord's given me.
Absolutely. What would you say, you would do differently as a Christian lawyer than maybe a different lawyer that is not a Christian? What are some of those? Have you picked up on some of those characteristics or the way that you maybe treat a client? And you kind of said going into a jail, obviously. I love that because a lot of those people have never experienced the fruits of the Spirit is pretty much what you say.
Yeah. But Paul was in jail.
Right. And
Paul was in prison for a long time.
Oh, definitely.
A lot of Christians have been thrown into prison.
Yes.
And in the eyes of the world, a lot of times they were the criminals. We have to remember in the Supreme Court of the United States on the wall, and I've been there. There are the givers of the law. There's different murals and sculptures, the givers of the law. What is the root of the law? Well, if you look back in the Old Testament, there are a lot of those rules that are continued through. The Ten Commandments, many of them are continued through into our law today.
Right.
We have laws against a lot of those things. So the root of law is really God's order, and the order of things. What I would do, what I try to do differently, and what I've learned to do differently is, we as Christians respect God's creation. We respect not just natural creation and the things of the world, but in people. And I people always ask me, how could I defend somebody that I know did it? And if there's somebody that's being crass or rude to me, sometimes I'll just tell them it's the money and leave it at that. But that's not really it. What I tell them is this: in our world, in our system, everyone's innocent until proven guilty. And I have seen men and women who did not commit a crime spend time in jail awaiting disposition of their case, and they lose their house, they lose their job, they lose their place in society, they get ostracized. You see on Facebook where someone's accused of a heinous crime, and people underneath write, take them out back, beat them with a bat. The people of the world are posting constantly, do this harm to them. And I tell them, is that the society you want to live in? Where the accusation alone is enough to get you beaten in your backyard, to get you. And so in the real world, showing the love of Christ oftentimes is showing them basic humanity. On the street, respect is a currency. People will kill you over lack of respect or disrespect more than they will over money. And they will hurt you over disrespect. I don't have to be fearful of them hurting me, because I just respect them. God created them. They're someone's son. They're someone's brother. They have a family that loves them and cares for them. Yeah. And they may be someone who the Lord comes into their life, changes them, and a decade later, they're serving, they're advancing the cause of Christ. And, they are at all times entitled to be treated with respect. Mm-hmm. And as a Christian, I know that. I'm going to respect them as God's creation. Obviously, there are moments where I feel better about that than others, and some moments I don't feel better about that. But at the end of the day, I'm going to make sure that the government does what they're supposed to do. I want to make sure that, and my clients know that, and it gives them a respect for the system, a respect for me, and ultimately, if the opportunity presents itself, a respect for who is in me. And so as a Christian, that's what I think as a professional in particular, you want to, because I'm not in full-time ministry. I mean, I'm in business, and as many people are, right? Mm-hmm. But we still are part of the kingdom, that we need to show people the love of Christ. And if someone's at the darkest moment of their life, that 2:00 call in the morning where Mama's calling because her son is now gone to jail, and she doesn't know how to get him out of jail, his bond, he's got work the next day, he's got bills to pay. How do we go about resolving this for him? It's a moment to be able to share with them, love on them, and do your duty.
That's really incredible how you bring glory to God. You glorify God through the way that you're treating other people, the way that you're thinking about them, and the way that you're performing your job and your duty. That's really amazing. What would you say has been maybe the biggest hurdle to overcome as a Christian lawyer? Is there anything that maybe you haven't already gone into that's...
I don't really think that there are many big hurdles, at least not down here. I practice in the South. We're in the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, as they say. And even those that are not serving the Lord every day, they'll profess to be Christians, they'll profess to be believers. So there's not a pushback on that from the general practice of the bar. Most every lawyer I know around here, and every judge for the neighboring 25 counties, for those that aren't from Louisiana, we call those parishes. They're all to the person, anti-abortion, pro God, profess Christianity rather than Islam. We don't have a lot of that here. I think it would be different if I were practicing in some parts of the country where there's maybe a different demographic, maybe a different political bent, maybe a different personal belief system. We have really good camaraderie amongst our bar. The cops and I get along well. The other lawyers that I oppose, the judges will rule against us, and we'll all go to lunch afterwards. They do their job, we do our job. So it really hadn't been around here as much.
That's super. That's a blessing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Face some of those more difficult things. I was wondering, Brother Rob, we were talking this summer, and I remember you were telling me a story about one of the most defining cases in your professional career, and really one of those things that just stood out to you and was like, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I remember going away from that conversation with you just going, wow, like really gaining a better understanding of what you do, how you're able to help people, and really giving respect for those who are practicing law, but then specifically with the Christian background as well, able to really help those who are helpless, in this case, I know. So I was wondering if you would just take a little bit of time, maybe share that defining story to the best of your ability that you could with us.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take you back to that story I talked about earlier when I got out of law school in 2003. So I came back to Bienville Parish, opened a small office with an older man named Hal Redwine Henderson. Mr. Henderson had flown bombers in World War II. He had been the DA back in the 80s. He was just a really, really cool guy, a good lawyer. And I rented an office from him for little next to nothing because I didn't have much money. And had debt from law school, had a new wife, didn't have any children yet. That was 7 children ago, but we were young and we were just starting out. And I was 2 years into practice. I was in that little office across from the courthouse. And one day, an elderly African American gentleman came into my office with his son, and he wanted to see me, wanted to talk to me. He had heard, this young lawyer was in town, and he had a problem. He thought maybe I could fix it for him. And he said, "Mr. Moore, somebody stole my land." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? How does that happen? Like, they put it in a truck and drive it away? Like, what? How did they steal your land?" I mean, it seemed awkward, and in a very simplistic way, he said, "Mr. Moore, I remember it well. It was 1953." And I'm thinking, 1953. That was 30-something years before I was born. I mean, where's this going? And he said, my neighbor was leasing his land, and my neighbor was talking to the landman, and he was leasing it for $500 an acre for mineral rights and for drilling. Down here, we have a good bit of oil and gas activity and drilling. And he lived over in Castor, right next to Ringgold. So he goes to the landman goes to the neighbor's house, and he cuts the deal for $500 an acre. And the neighbor says, "Look, my neighbor over here, a man named Mr. Egan's, I think he would like to lease his land. He's got, I think it was 20 acres for 500 acres. That's $10,000. And he said, the landman looked at him and looked at his list and said, "Well, I don't see where Mr. Egan's owns that property." "Well, what do you mean? He's lived there for 40 years. I mean, I've known him for 40 years. That's his house right there." "No, he doesn't own that property." So the neighbor called up my client, Mr. Egan's, and he said, "Egan's, you better get over here. Something's not right." And so Egan's came over, and they talked, and he said, "Mr. Moore, it was 1953. And I said, "Well, what happened in 1953? He said, "Well, I went into the store here in town." Now, I'll digress just a little bit. In the South, in the 1950s, banking was conducted 2 ways, through a commercial bank and through a local store. This was not just unique to the South. It was very common in farming communities. So this would happen in the farming areas of Indiana, Ohio, where a local store would trade with the farmer. The farmer would buy on credit whatever his wife needed for food, whatever he needed for parts, tools, implements, an animal, and then he would run a tab. And then when harvest season would come, he would sell some animals or cut his crop or whatever, and he would pay off his tab. And the store would do that without interest because it was just the cost of doing business. It was part of it.
Interesting.
But store owners had capital, and people sometimes needed some of it. And so they would go to the store and they would borrow some money from the store owner. And the store owner would, on that, he would charge interest. So if you borrowed $500, he might charge 5% interest on a 2-year note. So you'd pay back every week or every month a part of the capital and part of the interest. Well, unfortunately, things back then and things now are not uncommon. People get sometimes over their skis and get too much in debt. And so they would, at the end of the time, not be able to pay off their tab. And if the store owner wanted to foreclose or force the issue, he would. Sometimes you would have to give him some of your land to pay off your debt. It was a up and up transaction in those days. If I had 40 acres and I owed money, I'll give the store owner 3 acres of it and pay off my debt. Keep my 37, right? Well, store owners became wealthy. They ended up, in today's world, you look around these towns, and almost every town in the South has a former store owner that he's dead, but the family that are his descendants own hundreds, sometimes thousands of acres of land in that community.
Wow.
And they were just businessmen. They were intelligent businessmen that had capital. And if you have capital and you know how to use it with interest, you can become wealthy. So back to the story at hand. So my client goes into the store in 1953 and borrows $600 to buy a farm-all tractor, a very common tractor in the South back then. And he said, Mr. Moore, I borrowed that money and I paid it off. He said, the man I borrowed it from, his name was Lacey. He said, Mr. Lacey told me I need some security on your place. I need you to give me a mortgage on your property so I can ensure that you'll pay me back. He says, okay, I'll do that. And they hand me a piece of paper and I signed it. And he said, I paid it all back with interest. You want to see the receipts? I said, yeah, I want to see the receipts. So he went to his car and got a shoebox and brought me in a shoebox full of receipts.
Wow.
$4 here, $6 there, $10 here. And we added it all up. He had paid all the money back. He didn't know anything about it from 1956, 57 until 2006, 2005.
Wow.
When the landman went to check title and the land was in the name of Lacey. You see, the document that he signed was not a mortgage. It was a cash sale deed for the entirety of his 20 acres for the amount of money that he borrowed for the farm-all tractor. I said, Mr. Egan's, can you read? He said, I can now, a little bit, but I couldn't read in the 1950s. He couldn't read. He was an uneducated man. His son was very educated. His son had a college degree, and they had deciphered and figured out what happened, so he came to me to fix it. That was an injustice. He was cheated out of his land. He never knew it. He lived there. He never moved. Same brick house, which was key to the case because there's a limit in most cases when you can file suit to right a wrong. Sometimes that's a year. Sometimes that's 5 years. In many cases, it's a maximum of 10 years. And in this case, that would have been the case. He would have had the right in 1954, 55, but as of 64, 65, or 40 years before he came into my office, he would have lost it. But in Louisiana, you can acquire property through what's known as acquisitive prescription. You can possess it for 30 years. Even if you never owned it, you can just fence it up, live on it, farm it. After 30 years, you become the owner of it. It's squatter's rights is what it's referred to in a lot of states. We call it acquisitive prescription. So I filed a lawsuit alleging that Mr. Egan's, even if he had lost his property in 1965, never moved. He possessed it for at least 30 years, from 1965, and in 1995, he reacquired it, or 10 years before he came into my office. And I remember it very well. The lawyer for the family, they were living in Mississippi. The old man had died, the grandpa had passed away, and she called me and she said, the lawyer did, she said, my clients are not going to oppose the lawsuit. And so we prepared a judgment that the judge signed, righting the wrong, putting the land back in the name of Mr. Egan's, the man who rightfully it should have been in the whole time. And that's an example of how the law is supposed to work. The law is supposed to right a wrong. And that had a very profound impact on me as a young lawyer. And it had a profound impact on me that it didn't matter class or race. It shouldn't matter. Class, race, demographic. The law is the law. Lady Justice wears a blindfold for a reason. She carries a scale that is balanced for a reason. And it's supposed to be even Steven, fair. And the evidence weighs one way or the other, and you decide, okay, based upon the law and the evidence, this is the correct ruling. And in that case, it fixed. Now, I've had cases before, since then, that the law didn't work right. I've had cases where the law did. The law's not perfect. It's run by people, and people are not perfect.
Wow. That's a great story. That's
incredible.
That's inspirational. And the Lord's using you, and you're seeking to give him glory, and that's wonderful.
Can I do one little plug real quick?
Oh, absolutely.
If you don't take anything from today, be willing to serve in this system. Too many people are not willing to serve as jurors. They say they can't be fair, or they've got a mortgage to pay and they can't miss work, or they've got to pick the kids up from school at 3:30. And those are all true. Those are all things that people have. But when those people get off a jury, we're left with people who don't have kids, who don't have a mortgage, who don't have a job, and who just enjoy getting $26 a day and watching Jerry Springer, which is what sometimes courtroom dramas are. And so I would encourage everyone, that is especially believers, we need people with a moral compass that is based upon Scripture to decipher right from wrong, because you understand the order of how things are supposed to work biblically, scripturally. And I think more people need to be willing to serve in that system. As a lawyer, I see that over the last 20 years of practice, where people are less willing to be a witness. Because it's inconvenient. We've become a society with, I can text or respond immediately. And so we're used to that fast-paced life. And you got to kind of shut all that down for 2 or 3 days sometimes and go to court. But without doing that, the system doesn't work. So that's all I wanted to plug on there for the listeners, especially young people as they grow up and they get married. Be willing to do that. Do your duty to serve.
Amazing. I think that's so helpful to really all young people as we seek to even help each young person take their next step here at Southland, and that is our desire. And you never know, maybe somebody will go into practicing law that's listening to this podcast even today. Well, thank you so much, Brother Rob, for being here and joining Scott and myself on our podcast. And just a heads up for our listeners, next week we're actually going to have Brother Rob back on to talk about his family and a little bit more about his personal life. And so be sure to tune back in with us next week, back here on the Friday Focus on the Walk Talks podcast. So until then, we will see you guys later.
We hope that you enjoyed today's episode of Friday Focus, presented by the Walk Talks podcast. Make your plans to join us next week for another set of podcast episodes that will encourage you in your walk with the Lord Jesus Christ.